I am very excited, as I said, to share the word today, and we are in a series called Rewind. We're going through different stories in the Bible, and we are learning from them, and we're seeing how they speak to our day today. And I'm excited to share with you today from the story of Elijah, and I hope I can bring some fresh revelation, fresh perspective for you today. Amen. And my goal is that this will help you today. I hope you will leave here today built up in your faith. That is my goal. I want to build up your faith today. And so let's read the scriptures. We're going to go into 1 Kings chapter 18. I just want to read a short verse, and then we'll kind of get into it a little more, and I'll give you some context and some of the backstory and really what's going on surrounding this verse today. And so this is Elijah. He's praying. We're just jumping into a short snippet of the story. We're starting in verse 36, and it says, "At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, 'Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command.' And he says, 'Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again.'" So today, I want to share from this story, the story of Elijah, and I want to title the message, I want to theme the message today, "Losing 450 to 1. Losing 450 to 1. Have you ever had a losing season in your life? Have you ever experienced one of those seasons where maybe as a parent, right? Maybe as a grandparent, maybe as a son or daughter, maybe in school. Have you ever had one of those seasons where it's just like, it did not feel like you were winning? Where it just, as a matter of fact, it felt like you had more going against you than you had going for you? Have you ever experienced one of those seasons where it's like, well, there's another loss. There's another loss. There's another one. There's another one. Well, what is going on? Right? And those seasons can be difficult. Those seasons can be confusing. And today I want to read a story where Elijah, this incredible biblical figure, he is experiencing a season just like that. And it even goes as far as taking it to the next level, where in this portion of the biblical story, you actually see all the odds stacked against God himself. And so I want to share with you from this story, because I want to preach to those seasons of your life where it's hard to see. I want to preach to those seasons of your life today where it's hard to see how God is working, where it's hard to see exactly what it is that God is doing and how he's working in everything that is going on, when it seems like you are losing, when it feels like you are losing. And so I want to share from this story, 1 Kings chapter 18 and Elijah. And I'm gonna rewind now a little bit, and we're gonna go back and we're gonna jump into a little earlier in the story. And we're jumping into a conversation between Elijah and another man named Ahab. Okay? And Ahab, he was the king of the nation. Elijah was a prophet of God. And Ahab, he was not a very faithful king, you see. So he actually was leading the nation astray, away from God. And because of that, him and Elijah, well, like, to put it lightly, they did not really get along, okay? Like, they were not good friends. Like, their conversations did not go well often. And so we're jumping into one of those conversations. And it says, Ahab went out to meet Elijah. And when Ahab saw him, he exclaimed, I love this, "So is it really you, you troublemaker of Israel?" Don't you love to be greeted like that by somebody? So is it really you, you're trouble? And it's not sarcastically. You know, like people like, you have dads that are like, "Oh, you're a troublemaker." No, he's real. He's like, "You are a troublemaker." He does not like him very much. And he goes on, and Elijah replies, and he says, "I have made no trouble for Israel." Elijah replied, "You and your family are the troublemakers, for you have refused to obey the commands of the Lord and have worshipped the images of Baal instead." So right off the bat, you can see that it's like kind of tense. You know what I mean? Like they're going at each other right off the bat. It's a little tense. And the truth is, okay, if I'm like honest with you for a second, if you kind of zoom out and as you're reading through the Bible story, like, you know, you're reading through the whole story, 30,000 feet, and you start reading this portion of the story. Like if I'm honest for a second, this is not a very bright spot in the story of the Bible. Like this is actually like a pretty bleak moment in the story. Things are actually getting pretty bad because, see, the nation actually had just been experiencing so much division that they actually split. And not only that, but at the point of this conversation, there are 100 prophets, other prophets of God, that are actually hiding in caves away because they are afraid for their life. Right? And so all of this is going on. They're threatened to be killed. And like, honestly, we're entering kind of like not the happiest portion of the Bible. Like this is like, man, things are kind of going south. And so Elijah stands up and he's about to challenge this king Ahab. And he's actually about to challenge all of the prophets. And he's going to say, gather all of your prophets of Baal, of these other gods that you are worshiping, and let's see who's really God. And so he goes on and he says, now summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who are supported by Jezebel. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of the Lord who is left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Now bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish and cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood of the altar, but without setting fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood on the altar, but not set fire to it. Then call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. And all the people agreed. So after this, the story gets a little weird, I'll be honest with you. The other prophets, Elijah lets them go first. And as they're going, they start kind of chanting and singing and dancing. And then like they start like cutting themselves, and they start doing some kind of weird stuff. And Elijah just lets them keep going, and he's just watching and he's just hanging out. And the story says that they just keep dancing and doing stuff, and they keep going, and they keep going, and they keep going, and nothing's happening. And then Elijah, this is really funny, and then Elijah starts making fun of them. He's like, like Elijah, like, you know, he gives you a little hope if you're a Christian, but you still got a little bit of an attitude. You know, it's like, I like Elijah. Elijah's my homie. Because, you know, like, he's like, yeah, I think, he like starts making fun of them. He's like, I think y'all got to shout louder. I don't think you're shouting loud enough. And then he literally says, I think your God's in the bathroom. I think he's on the toilet, guys. You got to shout louder. Maybe he's sleeping. Or maybe he's like on a trip. Just keep shouting. And he's like, and they keep going, and then they like cutting themselves, and okay, it gets a little weird. And then Elijah's finally like, all right, I'm done with this. And he goes on and he says, then Elijah called to the people, come over here. And they all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one to represent each of the tribes of Israel, and he used the stones to rebuild the altar in the name of the Lord. Then he dug a trench around the altar, large enough to hold about 3 gallons. He piled wood on the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid the pieces on the wood. Then, he said, fill 4 large jars with water, and pour the water over the offering and the wood. After they had done this, he said, do the same thing again. And when they were finished, he said, now do it a 3rd time. So they did as he said, and the water ran around the altar and even filled the trench. And so here's the thing. I got to pause here for a second. I got to pause here because you know what's about to happen? He's about to pray, Lord, answer me, answer me. And fire is going to come down, right? But I got to pause here for a second because, like, if we're honest, like, the end is always, it's really easy to preach. I'll be honest with you. Like, that's really easy to preach, right? And like, man, God came through. God is the one true God. God answered the prayer. God came through. That's really easy to preach, and that's really easy to get the point across. But here's the thing that we can do, is that we can miss what the writer has been trying to emphasize all along. It's real easy to get to the end and be like, yep, that's the message. And it is. Don't get me wrong. It is. But what has the writer been trying? Why was this story here? What is this story trying to tell you and me? And see, this story has been very clearly emphasizing a few things if you kind of pay attention. See, it's kind of emphasizing not only the end of the story, but the means to the end, the situation before the end. See, the truth is, it's not an accident that he kept bringing up over and over. I am the only one. There's 450, and there is one of me. It's not an accident that they over there had a clean and not wet and dry altar, and over here he was like, pour water on it, and then pour water on it again, and then pour water on it again, even though I'm about to pray for fire. These things that are being emphasized in the story, they are not an accident. And what the writer wants to communicate to you and I is very intentional and is very purposeful. There's a reason he wanted to include this. And I believe that it's speaking to us today in many different ways. And I have two things that I want to share with you from these verses. And the first of the things that I believe that this writer wants you and me to know is that God is still God, even in a culture where it looks like God is losing. God is still God, even in a culture where it looks like he is losing. See, I don't know if you know, but they say that in our world, and especially in a city like ours and in our nation, we are entering what they, and have entered, and in our city definitely have entered, what they are calling a post-Christian society, where God, who was once central to culture, Christianity at once center in culture, is now no longer. And see, this is a really dark time in their story, because God, who was once king of Israel, who was at one point center in culture, is now no longer. And I don't know about you, but I've seen many people in our day today begin to walk away from their faith, even very prominent figures. And there's a whole movement based upon deconstructing your faith, right? And we encounter a story like this. And this story wants to speak to our time. And what it wants to tell you and me today is that it's trying to say that no matter where the world goes, no matter where culture goes, God is still at work. That God is still God. And see, the truth is, I love that the Bible acknowledges this. I love that the Bible acknowledges that this happens. This has happened in history, and that this happens in our world. But that does not mean that God is not who he says he is. I love that the Bible can paint us a picture of a culture in a world that decides to go where they want it to go, because God has given it the freedom. But it does not mean that God has been thrown off. It does not mean that God is caught by surprise. It does not mean that God isn't who he says he is. And I want you to know that today, that no matter where our culture goes, no matter where the world decides to go, that you can still trust that he knows what he's doing. That you can still trust that he is who he says he is. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is the same in the mountaintop, in the valley low, and everywhere in between. He is the same no matter where the world goes, no matter if the world chooses to trust or not. He is the same. And I need you to know today that he has not given up on the world. I need you to know today that he gave his son because he so loved the world. And he's not done working. And he has not retreated. And he has not left us to do our own thing. He still loves the world. He so loves people that he died for people. He has not given up on the world. And regardless where culture goes, he is still God. You don't need to let frustration win, followers of Jesus. You don't need to let fear win. You don't need to let division win. He is still God. No matter what. And the writer was writing this story to a nation that had been experiencing so much division, so much brokenness. Most scholars agree that the reason the writer was writing this is he was writing this so that the Israelites in exile, everything has been torn down, they've been taken away. He was writing to encourage them. I know your world looks crazy. I know everything looks upside down. I know it seems like the odds are stacked against God. I know it seems like the world is going a completely different way, but take heart, he is still God. He is still at work. May you be encouraged by that. No matter what you see in the world, no matter what may happen, because who can tell you the future? No one can. But I can tell you that no matter what may come, whether it's great or not, who knows? I know he is still God. Somebody give me an amen. Amen. Even if it's 450 to 1. Second thing I want you to know, and I believe that this verse is trying to speak to you and to me, is trust God even when it looks like you are losing. Trust God even when it looks like you are losing. Can you imagine what Elijah felt like when he was going up against 450 other prophets? And not only that, but all other 100 of his fellow prophets are hiding in caves. Like, can you imagine just for a second, like kind of put yourself in that situation? Like, he keeps bringing it up because he's actually afraid. Like that's kind of a big deal. It's 450 to 1. And the great thing is the story ends and it was a win. His prayer was answered and that was amazing. But here's the thing, just stopping there, if we just stop at the win, if we just stop at the prayer being answered, that's kind of like comparing your own life to somebody else's like highlight reel on Facebook and Instagram. All they do is win. All they do is have a good life. Everything just seems to be working out for them. And we get all sad. But see, the truth is, after this win, the story gets even crazier. It gets a little wild from here. Because who knows that you can have a big faith moment, but it doesn't mean you don't struggle anymore, right? Who knows you can have a big faith moment, but it doesn't mean you've got it all together. And I like that because it means you don't have to have it all together to have a big faith moment. I need to say that one more time. It means that you don't have to have it all together to have a big faith moment. You're not counted out. And it gets a little crazy from here because after God comes through, fire, whoosh, amazing, gets a little crazy. There's like murders, there's like threats of murders. Elijah ends up running away and he's like, I'm out of here. And he actually comes to a place right after this big faith moment, right after this seemingly big win, he gets to actually one of the darkest moments of his life. He actually comes to a point where he asks God to take his life. Can I read this to you? He says, then he went alone into the wilderness. This is 1 Kings 19. It says, then he went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. he sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. And then he goes on and he has this powerful encounter with God. You might be familiar with it, where there's a windstorm and God is not in the windstorm, and there's an earthquake and God is not in the earthquake, and there's a fire and God is not in the fire, but there's a whisper. And then the whisper, he has an encounter with God, because who knows, in these seasons, you want God to speak to you in the earthquake, in the fire. You want God to speak to you in a big way, but he wants to encounter you in the whisper. He wants to encounter you in the little things. He's speaking to you. You might not feel like he's speaking to you in this season. I'm telling you, God is not trying to keep himself from you. God is speaking to you. It might be in a whisper. You just got to pay attention a little bit. And so Elijah goes on and he has this encounter with God. And then God asks Elijah, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he replied again, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you. They have torn down your altars and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. I feel like I'm losing." I'm so glad the Bible doesn't just show the highlight reel. Elijah was in a hard season. It felt like he was losing. It looked like he was losing. God, if you are for me, why am I down 450 to 1? God, if you are at work, why are all the odds stacked against me, Lord? And I don't know if you've ever been in a season like that. Maybe in your purpose, maybe in what God has called you to, maybe as a parent. No, I don't know if you've ever been in a season where you just could not see what God was doing, where it felt like you were losing. And Elijah find himself in this season right here where he could not see the win. He could not see, God, what are you doing in this season? I feel like I'm losing. And then God responds. And we can have the band start coming up. The God responds. And he tells him two things. And I want to highlight these two things for you just real quick. The first thing that God says in his response to here. God says, go and find a man named Elisha. He says, go and find a man named Elisha. And Elisha was going to be the guy who was going to continue the work that Elijah did. I know it's confusing. Elijah, Elisha. God says, go find Elisha. He will continue the work that you are doing. And see, the interesting thing is that what Elijah didn't know is that from this moment, God was going to continue to use him. And God was going to continue to use him to do amazing things. And then what God was going to do is God was going to bring Elisha under him. And what Elijah didn't know is that only Elijah had what Elisha needed to complete his mission. God had put into Elijah what Elisha needed to go on and continue his mission. And Elisha would actually go on to do double what Elijah did. There's literally 7 recorded miracles for Elijah, and then there's 14 recorded miracles for Elisha. And Elijah might have not known it at this point, but 2,000 years later, we would still be talking about him. We would still be learning from him. Not because every aspect of his life seemed like it was a win, but because God begins to use our life in a way that's bigger than us. And I love God's response. He says, go and find Elisha. Because what God started in Elijah wasn't completed during Elisha's time, but that's okay because it was God who was at work, working something bigger than him. And can I tell you something about the things that God calls you to? Can I tell you something? They're not limited to you. They're not limited to your timeline. See, because even when it looks like there are no results, even when it looks like all the odds are stacked against you, even when it feels like you are losing, even when your child is not starting a relationship with the Lord, even when your grades at school seem to be failing, even when you can't decide what to do for the rest of your life, even if you don't feel like you are winning in this season, like you are seeing the results in this season, I need you to know that God is at work doing something bigger than just you. I need you to know that God is thinking legacy when we're thinking today. I need you to know that God is thinking generationally when we're thinking tomorrow. I need you to know that you can trust God with your today because He is at work with something greater than today. You can trust Him with the little because He is doing something big. And the big is His job and the little is ours. And it might seem like it's pointless. Elijah, I've been preaching. I've been zealously serving the Lord. I've been working hard. I've been doing this. I've been doing that. And I see no results, God. I'm done. I give up. God says, go find Elisha. And then He says, second thing. And then He says, He tells him a fact, a little fun fact that Elijah didn't know. He says, there are 7,000 others who have not bowed down to Baal. Elijah thought he was alone. God, but I'm alone. God, but I'm losing. God, I'm down 450. And God tells him, no, Elijah. There are 7,000 others. And the last thing I want you to know today is that God is working even when you can't see it. Because the truth is, if you're gonna keep going in these seasons where it feels like you're losing, where it feels like things aren't working out, if you are going to keep going, you have to have faith for the fact that God might be working in ways that you just aren't seeing. God, I'm down 450 to 1. Yeah, that's just what you can see. That's just what you can see. And if I can call you to faith in those seasons, to trust that God is working something bigger, to trust that God is working on your behalf, you gotta know His character. He's not the type to just sit up there and watch. That's not who He is. And just because you can't see Him working, it doesn't mean He isn't. And if I could encourage you today, is that your wasted season is gold for God. The season you feel like you're losing, the season where you feel like the odds are stacked against you, is a season that He might use more than most of others. You know why? Can we put the first verse back up again, the prayer? And as we close, let's stand, and I just want to read this last verse for you as we close up today's message. Go to the next slide. I love Elijah's prayer. He says, start in the middle, he says, answer me, Lord. Answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. I want you to know that God is going to use your losing season to declare that He is God, to declare that He can do what only He can do in and through your life. I want you to know today that there is no wasted season when you are walking with God. I want you to know that when it feels like you are losing, you can trust Him to be at work. I want you to believe today that God, as I'm taking care of the little, you are doing something bigger than me. You are doing something bigger than I can see. You are doing something bigger than I could ever accomplish on my own. And if I could stir up some faith in you today, I want to tell you exactly what God told Elijah. What he tell him? He said, just keep going, Elijah. Just keep going. Just don't stop. Just don't quit, because I'm going to bring Elisha. It's generational. It's bigger than you, because there are 7,000 others, because I'm working in ways you can't see. I'm using your life in ways that you can't see. Just keep going. And I want to encourage you today, follower of Jesus, in our world today, keep serving God. Don't grow tired of doing good. Keep going on the mission. Keep serving Him. Keep going, church. Oh, but the culture is changing. But the church is losing ground. Man, whatever. If we're down 450 to 1, He is still at work. And what God wants to see is a church of faith. Lord, everyone else is hiding in caves. Everyone else is retreating. God, I'm losing. God, this is hard. It does not mean it's not hard. It's hard. But He wants you to know, keep going. I know what I'm doing. Keep going. I am still